So here's a question that echoes through just about every tradition. When a source of divine guidance isn't physically around anymore, how does a community find its way? It's a huge challenge. In this explainer, we're going to dive into how Shia Islam developed this really unique and intricate system to answer that very question, making sure there's always a link to what it holds as sacred truth.
And that's the core problem, right? I mean, if the original map maker is gone, how can you really trust the map centuries down the line? For Shia Muslims, this question became absolutely central after the occultation of the 12th Imam. The answer they came up with is this incredible system built on 1, preservation, and 2, expert interpretation. It's all about making sure that original guidance stays a living, breathing reality.
So, where do you even start?
Well, the answer begins with the foundational texts. After the Quran, the main source of guidance comes from this huge collection of recorded sayings, actions, and even the silent approvals of the Prophet Muhammad and the Shia Imams. This whole body of knowledge is known as hadith.
And this really shows you the sheer effort we're talking about. What you're looking at is the title page of Wasail al-Shia. It's a truly monumental work put together back in the 17th century by Sheikh Hud Amili, and it's one of the most comprehensive, most authoritative collections of these essential teachings out there.
And you can just feel the passion behind it when you read the words of the compiler himself, Sheikh Hud Amili. For him, this wasn't some academic project. He called the study of hadith the most noble and reliable of sciences, something worthy of dedicating your entire life to. That tells you everything about the profound reverence at the heart of this tradition.
Now, here's a really crucial point. This guidance was meant for everybody. The hadith aren't some cryptic, coded texts for a handful of elites. They often record simple, direct conversations between the Imams and their followers. The language is meant to be accessible, designed to give every single believer a direct line to the teaching.
Okay, so if the teachings are preserved and the language is pretty straightforward, what's the big deal? Well, the challenge isn't about access, it's about scale. You know, it's one thing to have a library, but it's another thing entirely to navigate a vast, sprawling ocean of information.
36,000. Let that sink in for a second. That's roughly how many individual narrations are in just this one collection. We're talking about an ocean of information, and trying to navigate that requires a whole lot more than just some casual reading. The sheer volume is an immediate and, frankly, massive challenge.
And this slide right here, this gets to the heart of the tension. On one hand, yeah, the language is accessible, the words are often direct and clear. But on the other hand, applying that language correctly, that's a whole different ballgame. You absolutely need specialized knowledge to figure out if a hadith is authentic, to understand its historical context, and to sort out what might look like contradictions.
And here's a perfect example of why that expertise is so vital. It's this concept called taqiyya. It basically allowed for a ruling to be modified if the community was under threat of persecution, which for the early Shia community was a very real danger. So what does that mean? It means you might find 2 hadith from the very same Imam that seem to say opposite things, because one was given under duress. Figuring out which one applies today isn't just a simple reading exercise. You need a specialist.
And that brings us to the solution the tradition came up with: a class of highly trained scholars. Think of them as the specialist navigators who can chart a course through this vast ocean of text.
So, just to recap, we have the hadith. That's the foundational source material. This is the raw data, the direct link to the teachings. But to actually make sense of all this data, you need a specialist.
And that specialist is known as a faqih. Now, this isn't just someone who's read a lot of books. A faqih is an expert who has gone through years and years of intense training in tons of different fields. We're talking linguistics, history, logic, all to build up the skills needed to interpret these texts the right way.
The process they use is called ijtihad. You can think of it as the intellectual engine of the whole system. It's the structured, methodical reasoning a faqih uses to analyze all the sources and then come up with rulings for modern issues, problems that might not have been explicitly mentioned in a text from 1,200 years ago.
So how does the average person tap into all this expertise? That's where Taqleed comes in. It's the practice of following the rulings of a qualified faqih. And just like that, the system is complete. You have this clear, reliable chain from the original hadith through the ijtihad of the faqih, leading right into a person's daily life through Taqleed.
All right, so let's put it all together. What does this whole system of texts and scholars and following actually look like in the real world? What does it mean for someone who's just trying to live their faith day to day?
Take a look at this hadith from Wasail al-Shia. It's a really powerful example. I mean, it's a stark reminder that the intention behind your worship is what really truly matters. praying just so other people see you and think you're pious, rather than for God, it can completely invalidate the whole act. This is the kind of direct, spiritual guidance you find in these texts.
And here is how it all clicks together in practice. A believer can read a hadith, like the one we just saw, to understand the spirit of the law, the why. But then, through Taqleed, they follow their chosen faqih for the super specific details of that law, the how. This creates this amazing synthesis where their actions are grounded in both the original sources and expert analysis. The goal isn't to be a robot just going through the motions. It's to reach a state of sincere obedience, guided by both text and tradition.
So we kind of end where we started, but now with a much deeper understanding. The Shia tradition gives us one really compelling answer to this timeless question of balancing direct personal access with expert authority. And really, it's a question every tradition, whether it's religious or secular, has to wrestle with. How do we honor our foundational texts while making sure they're applied with wisdom and expertise in a world that is always changing?